Real-Time 1960s presents Evening Report, a complete roundup of today's news with Joe Rubenstein.
Good evening. In Miami, the government cracks down on Cuban exile leaders. In Mississippi, police break up a voter registration march. In Washington, President Kennedy hits back at former President Eisenhower. The New York newspaper strike is over, Steve McQueen speaks out, and the Duke is coming home. Those are the headlines. The details after this message.
One of those nights. You know what the problem is. Your system isn't doing its job. Constipation. A very real problem at times. Where do you turn? To the laxative more people turn to than to any other. To X-Lax, the gentle, dependable, overnight laxative. Only X-Lax has a medically approved laxative ingredient in convenient chocolated tablets to help your system do its job again, to produce results much like normal in the morning. Now you feel refreshed, renewed. Now the world looks good to you again.
In Miami Saturday night, the U.S. government restricted prominent Cuban exile leaders in that city to Dade County and warned them, quote, not to depart from the U.S. until further notice, unquote. Exile leaders and prominent members of the refugee community were visited by agents of the U.S. Immigration Department and handed notices of the restrictions. Violation of the order could result in a fine of $5,000 or 5 years in prison or both. The action came after the State and Justice Departments announced a crackdown against any future exile raids on communist Cuba. The order drew angry reaction from Cuban exiles, one of whom said, quote, this is the last straw. No invasion, no government in exile, no jobs, and now no more attacks on Castro. It looks like Castro has won, unquote. The restrictions came 2 days after Soviet-built Cuban fighter jets fired on an American cargo freighter, the Floridian, in international waters off Cuba. There were no casualties and no hits were scored. The new restrictions are clearly aimed at preventing such incidents from boiling over into a new crisis with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. At today's press conference, President Kennedy was asked about the challenges involved in preventing raids by the Florida-based exiles.
Obviously, Florida, it's long coast, and it's possible that for some people to go from Florida and strike at a target and come back. We have attempted to discourage it for a number of reasons. We believe it's ineffective. There was a raid conducted in Cuba, left around the evening of the 17th and 18th, that shot at a Soviet merchant ship as a target of opportunity. It returned. A number of the people who took part in it came to Washington and held a press conference. It doesn't seem to us that this represents any real blow at Castro. It gives additional incentives for the Soviet Union to maintain their personnel in Cuba, to send additional units to protect their merchant ships. It will bring reprisals, possibly on American ships. We will then be expected to take a military action to protect our ships, which may bring a counteraction. I think that when these issues of war and peace hang in the balance, that the United States government and authorities, and when American territory is being used, should have a position of some control on the matter. So we don't think that they're effective. We don't think they weaken Castro, and in fact may assist him in maintaining his control. And I don't criticize these men who took part in this. They're anxious to see their island freed. We distinguish between those actions which we feel advances the cause of freedom and these hit-and-run raids which we do not feel advance the cause of freedom, and we're attempting to discourage those.
In Greenwood, Mississippi today, police broke up a voter registration march led by comedian Dick Gregory and arrested all 19 Negro demonstrators except Mr. Gregory. The nationally known comic announced he was canceling all his nightclub engagements and would remain in Greenwood, quote, to fight this thing until the government sends in troops, unquote. The marchers, including teenagers and several senior citizens, were stopped by police a few blocks from their voter registration headquarters. After ordering them to disperse, City Commissioner B.A. Hammond told them they could go to the courthouse and take the registration tests, but only individually or in small groups. The leaders, however, refused to break up the group. They were then arrested and herded onto a bus. Mr. Gregory, standing nearby, pointed at the police and told newsmen, quote, there's your story. Guns and sticks for old women who want to register. Look at them. A bunch of illiterate whites who couldn't pass the literacy test themselves, unquote. The police didn't acknowledge Mr. Gregory's remark. In Washington yesterday, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy unveiled a new bill designed to ensure that Negroes and whites will be treated equally under federal election laws. Mr. Kennedy told a news conference the legislation would require election officials to use the same standards and practices for all applicants seeking to vote in a federal election. Mr. Kennedy added, quote, "Under present law, we have found that whites get easier tests or are coached, while Negroes are rejected for technical omissions or minor errors," unquote. At today's press conference, President Kennedy was asked if the Justice Department could do more to support the voter registration drive in Greenwood, Mississippi.
Now, well, we've had a suit there since last August against the registrar on the ground of discrimination. The voting, we have now a suit which we launched the other day against the denial of the rights of the voters themselves. And then I would hope that the court would find that there has been a denial of rights, which seems to me evident. But on the subject itself, we have two federal suits, and both of them are very important, and both of them, I hope, will result in actions which will bring justice in Greenwood, Mississippi.
Greenwood is the county seat of Leflore County, where Negroes outnumber whites about 2-1. However, there are only 400 Negroes on the county voter rolls compared to 6,400 whites. At a press conference Friday, Greenwood Mayor Charles E. Sampson, a member of the racist White Citizens Council, said the true goal of the voter registration workers, quote, "is to follow the communist line of fomenting racial violence, and the obvious purpose of the Attorney General is to get votes for his brother," unquote. Last weekend, President Kennedy drove his family and weekend guests from Camp David to nearby Gettysburg to tour the Civil War battlefield. Gettysburg's most famous resident, former President Eisenhower, was not at home. He's spending the winter in Palm Desert, California. At today's press conference, the former president's name came up during a question about the federal budget. President Kennedy took strong issue with two of General Eisenhower's recent suggestions. Number one, that the 1964 budget could be cut by as much as $13 billion. And number two, that the Kennedy space program was quote-unquote spongy with waste.
Well, I think that President Eisenhower referred us to Morris Stams, his budget director, for guidance. And I've examined that record. Under Morris Stams, this country had the largest peacetime deficit in history. Took a $500 million surplus and put it into a $12.5 billion deficit. We had two recessions, 1958 and 1960, and we had the highest peacetime unemployment, 1959, since World War II. That's not a record that we plan to duplicate if we can help it. Now, secondly, the United States Congress almost unanimously made a decision that the United States would not continue to be second in space. We are second in space today because we started late. I don't think we should look with equanimity upon the prospect that we will be second all through the 60s and possibly the 70s. We have the potential not to be. I think that having made the decision last year that we should make a major effort to be first in space, I think we should continue to do so. Now, President Eisenhower this is not a new position for him. He has disagreed with this, I know, at least a year and a half ago, when the Congress took a different position. So he's not, it's a position I think he took from the time of Sputnik on, but it's a matter in which we disagree. So I think may be that there's waste in the space budget. If there's waste, then I think it ought to be cut out by the Congress, and I'm sure it will be. But if we're getting to the question of whether we should be reconcile ourselves to a slow pace in space, I don't think so. The budget may have gone up because the country's growing and the population's growing, but so is our gross national product. And the debt as a percentage of our gross national product steadily declining. So I think we're in good position, providing we can prevent an economic decline of the kind we had very rapidly, 58 and then 60. And I think we can do that if we have effective programs of the dimensions that we're talking about, plus the tax cut.
I'll have more news for you after this message.
Just remembered Anniversary Day. Mr. Florist, a big bouquet. He said, take these roses, you can't go wrong, and have a smoke. This won't take long. Viceroy? That's right. He said Viceroy tastes the way you'd like a filter cigarette to taste. Not too strong, not too light. Viceroy's got
the taste that's right.
That's right. Made another stop that night and treated myself to the taste that's right. Gonna thank that florist for his advice, roses and Viceroy.
Thank him twice.
So now I know, and I'll take all bets. If you smoke all 7 filter cigarettes, you'll find some too strong, some too light. But Viceroy's got the deep weave filter and the taste that's right. Not too strong, not too light. Viceroy's got the taste that's right.
Here again, Joe Rubenstein.
On Sunday, New York City's record 114-day newspaper blackout ended as the unions accepted a new contract with the publishers. A few hours later, first editions of morning papers were on sale at local newsstands. The workers voted to ratify a 2-year package of wage increases and fringe benefits, totaling $12.63 a man per week. The blackout cost the city's economy $250 million, cost the papers more than $108 million in revenue, deprived some 5.5 million readers of their regular daily papers, and placed more than 19,000 employees out of work. At today's press conference, President Kennedy was asked if there were any lessons in the resolution that might lead to the settling of future labor disputes in the industry.
No, I don't see it. I think that unless the unions and the employers are ready to accept compulsory arbitration, there's no indication that either would be. I don't see that we're going to be able to set up any mechanical operation which would stop a city strike. Now, a state may want to set up emergency procedures, which the federal government has in cases affecting the national health and safety. That's a state judgment. But I don't see any federal actions that can be taken. I do feel, looking at that strike could have been settled many days before it was, and conditions were quite similar to what was finally accepted. But neither side were prepared to take those actions which would have brought it to an end. But I don't see any mechanical changes we can make in laws which would affect the situation.
The first New York paper to hit the newsstands was the Daily Mirror, which heralded the settlement with a 21-gun salute from the Palisades on the New Jersey side of the Hudson River. Hollywood star Natalie Wood pressed the button that started the Mirror's presses rolling. Miss Wood was taking a break from location shooting for Love with the Proper Stranger, in which she co-stars with Steve McQueen. In the film, Miss Wood plays an unmarried sales clerk at Macy's who finds herself pregnant after a one-night stand with a musician played by Mr. McQueen, who does not remember her. Mr. McQueen, who previously starred on Wanted Dead or Alive, a series on CBS TV, is virtually the only actor whose success on the small screen has translated to the big screen. In a recent interview, the actor was asked for the secret to his success.
I don't know much about that, I'll tell you the truth. To me, it's just luck. You know, I think perhaps I was very lucky. I work very hard at my craft, but so does everybody else in the world, you know.
He was asked if there was a particular method he used to develop his characterizations.
Yeah, I try and, as feeble an attempt as I can do, I try very hard to try and get it out of myself so that I'm not, I don't like acting when it's playing house, you know. I believe that I try to extract out of my life the same reality that I'm existing in if I'm working, you know. Other than that, I just try to keep my kids out of the den so I can get some work done.
Finally, Mr. McQueen, an avid motorcyclist, was asked about a report that Hollywood executives were trying to prevent him from racing.
Yeah, they were, but I understand the problem, but, you know, I see the problem here, man, is you got to be happy. If you're not happy, you might as well chuck the whole business. And I don't picture myself as being dangerous or anything, but I never thought that sports car racing was that dangerous. It's as dangerous as you make it. It's terribly important to me. It's an important emotional outlet, and I plan on doing it, and I don't plan on stopping until I make the decision to stop. I try and keep in good shape. I work out a lot, and my wife's a good cook, and my kids keep me busy, so I'm trying to be about as healthy a guy as I can. You know, I just thought about something, you know. I've calmed down so much that I'm sitting here on this interview, and I notice, you know, I'm sitting here looking at all these people here, and I think, you know, that 2 years ago, I was really a wild guy, and I'm sitting here thinking what marriage life and kids have done for me. I've really calmed down. I guess you call it growing up.
Love with the Proper Stranger is one of 3 McQueen films set for release this year. The other 2 are The Great Escape, a war-adventure film with a large cast, and Soldier in the Rain, a comedy with Jackie Gleason and Tuesday Weld. Sports, right after this.
When you're under unusual stress, nerves taut, stomach uneasy, every second can bring painful misery from tension headache. This pain remedy is Bufferin, the one specially designed to relieve these symptoms of tension headache. And Bufferin will not cause stomach distress, actually helps soothe an over-acid stomach, gently relaxes tense nerves too. So for effective relief from tension headache, take Bufferin, amazingly fast Bufferin.
In Cincinnati tonight, the Celtics beat the Royals 128-110. In doing so, Boston tied the NBA's Eastern Division Final at 2 games apiece. Tonight, Tommy Heinsohn and Bob Cousy, playing his 100th playoff contest, provided the offensive sparks, while Bill Russell was his typically brilliant self on defense. In the Boston dressing room, an exhausted Cousy said, quote, "I wanted this game more than any I've played in for a long time. Fear was probably the reason. I felt that if we lost tonight, it would have been almost impossible to win the series. I had myself so psyched for this one that if anyone said hello to me, I think I would have cried," unquote. Russell said Boston's performance at the foul line was a decisive factor, stating, quote, "Imagine, we hit 30 of 33 at the line. That's really something. I get 10 out of 12, and I'm just about the only guy that missed," unquote. In the Western Final, Los Angeles guard Jerry West sank a 15-footer in the final second of a wild finish last night as the Lakers edged out the St. Louis Hawks 101-99 at the Los Angeles Sports Arena. With a few seconds remaining in the game and the score tied, the Hawks had possession of the ball and were waiting for one shot or overtime. Suddenly, St. Louis forward Cliff Hagan fumbled a pass. West, after grabbing the ball and surviving a Hagan body check, glanced at the clock and dribbled up court. 15 feet out, he stopped, calmly took aim, and swished it through for a true-life Hollywood ending. The Lakers now lead the series 2-0. And finally tonight, the Duke is coming home. The New York Mets announced Monday the long-awaited purchase of Duke Snider for $40,000 from the Los Angeles Dodgers. Following the announcement, the 36-year-old outfielder said, quote, "After 16 years in a Dodger uniform, it's tough, even when you know it's coming. You get a funny feeling, and a couple of tears have to drop. But I talked to my wife, and she's very happy about it, and so am I. The change should do me good," unquote. Snider, a Dodger since 1947, was one of the team's most popular and productive players, especially when the club was based in Brooklyn. The Duke will report to manager Casey Stengel in St. Petersburg tomorrow night, in preparation for the Mets opener against the Cardinals Tuesday at the Polo Grounds. Last year, Snider played in 80 games for the Dodgers, mostly as a pinch hitter. In a recent interview, he was asked if he still got a kick out of playing Major League Ball after all these years.
Yes, I do. I enjoy playing baseball. It's not just a point of actually a job. I wouldn't be as good a ball player as I have been if I didn't enjoy playing baseball. There's a difference. Everybody does better when they're doing something they like to do. About 3-4 years ago, I had a knee operation, and I had to battle back and establish myself again as a hitter, and I think I did that last year, and I feel great this year. I just hope that luck's with me for one more year.
Snider was asked about the future adjustment process he will undergo when he finally does retire.
I don't feel that it's too big a problem. You realize in your own mind and your own self that you're not able to do the job that you were doing in the past, and you adjust yourself to the coaching lines or scouting lines in baseball, or if you have to leave the game altogether, I think that's where the toughest part would come in. I know that several friends of mine who have left baseball, every spring while you're around them and see them, they're talking baseball, and it hurts them quite a bit. And I feel that if you can stay in contact somewhat with the game, why it won't be as tough to leave it.
This week, Snider said the hardest thing will be to play against his old teammates. The Dodgers' first meeting with the Mets is scheduled for April 29th at the Polo Grounds. And that, for this evening, completes our look at the latest news on this Wednesday, April 3rd, 1963. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day tomorrow.
This has been your Evening Report, a roundup of the latest news with Joe Rubenstein.